most recent exhibit called Voices from the Past. Our committee worked on this exhibit for about 2 years because we typically do really in-depth exhibits. And this one had to be the big picture. The big picture for Aransas County. We call it the making of Aransas County so that you understand that the whole story will be told here. Like many areas along the bays, we first of all had the American Indians here. We called them the Copan Indians, or the Spanish called them the Copan Indians. They were a member of the Karankawa tribe. They were actually named Karankawa by the Spanish. It was a Spanish word for small boat. So they were identifying the dugout canoes that they had. Later, we had the Spanish, who established a port in Copano in the 1700s. This was such a surprise to many people to learn about this early time that the Spanish were here and set up a port. So what we want to do is trace the story of Aransas County during the time of the Republic of Texas. We had major people here, people who signed the Declaration of Independence, people who were impresarios and actually had the cause to really bring people in from Ireland. As we move through the exhibit, you'll begin to see that we try to tell the story from the people. Again, we want the voices of the people to be heard. So we first have a story of James Power. Power came from Ireland, and he was given an impresario grant to bring in Irish and Mexican citizens to this area. So the Mexican government was interested in setting up a buffer zone between Mexico and the United States, and they thought Texas could serve that way. So they were happy to grant this, make this grant to Power in order to bring in Catholics who would be willing to participate in the Mexican government, because that's what it was at the time. Now, we have artifacts that tell us about Power's colony. And this is a really wonderful exhibit that tells us how much was going on in trade. These artifacts came from a bluff on Copano Bay. Power settled there in the 1820s. And these artifacts show that they were not just an outpost. They had a lot of trade going on with New Orleans, Havana, and the rest of the United States. So what you see here is the pottery from that time period. We call it transferware. There's some wonderful little pictures that depict sailing vessels as well as a cross. You see a pipe, a crinoline pipe. These pipes were poured into molds and made, and they were a big trade item. The discs that are green that are on the stand there are actually wine seals from the Médoc region of France. When we saw those, when we found those, I was amazed. We just don't think about our colonists being here in the 1830s and having such a sophisticated lifestyle. One other item I'd like to call your attention to is this coin, which is very difficult to see, but we have blown up a photograph of it. This is a coin that is critical of Andrew Jackson and his attempt to bring in a national bank. So this is really unique, again, because this dates from the early 1800s. Then we know that what was so important, why Rockport was even put here, is this bay, this big background that you see on this mural. This bay offered people a chance to dock very, very comfortably. So Rockport was named for the rocky ledge. There is a ledge of limestone that allowed the ships to come in and have a very strong place to dock. We have a piece of that limestone outside, actually, in our display in the yard. You'll have to see that when you come to visit us. The people who brought this in established a wharf, okay? And it was Richard Wood and James Daugherty, and they built what was known as the Big Wharf. This was after the Civil War, when there were many cattle roaming in South Texas. And the cowboys, ranchers, gathered the cattle up, rounded up the cattle, and brought them to the Big Wharf. There they loaded them live on schooners that would go to New Orleans, to Cuba, and to the East Coast. So that was really the beginning of commerce here in Aransas County and in Rockport. Later, we had the Morgan steamship line that came in to also bring service to this new port. Yeah. Here we have an area that we will say, please touch. This is a stereoscope. You've probably seen it before with the pictures that give you the 3D look way back in the 1800s. As Rockport develops as a town, we, of course, demand a courthouse. So we have one of the most spectacular courthouses anywhere. It was built in 1889. However, it got abandoned during the modernization craze and was actually demolished. So we have a brick, actually, from that courthouse, and we have a seal from the county court and keys from the county jail. So we wanted to be sure and represent this era. Next, we have a real effort to sell the coast by the Gulf Coast Immigration Company in 1910. It promoted the town and farming in the area. We had a very rich vegetable and fruit farming that went along in the early 1900s. We also were extremely part of the Hug the Coast Highway in 1926 to encourage tourists to come. By that time, people were driving, and it becomes a different way to get here. One of the biggest merchants in town was the Sorensen Mercantile. The Sorensen Mercantile is still here. It's one of the buildings that's downtown Rockport. Today it's called the Coastal Mercantile. And what we have here is a wonderful interior of the store itself, along with the coffee grinder. It was the commercial coffee grinder for the store. There was a wharf that went out from the back of the Sorensen store, so that it was called Mercantile, that could serve all of the schooners that were coming in. And here we have a typical schooner. This is a wonderful model that was made for us to specifically go in this exhibit. This is a little earlier than our 1870 development. This would have been used during the Civil War. We didn't have much going on right here in Rockport during the Civil War. Our home guard was very active, but the Union did come in to discourage gun runners from being in the bay. And this is a model of a gun runner, Confederate gun blockade runner called the Texas Star. We do have records of Lamar being shelled and bombarded during that time, and we have an example of a cannonball that was found on the beach at Lamar Peninsula. Of course, one of the really important industries here in Rockport is shrimping. And we have a wonderful shrimp boat and a poster talking about ships and captains and all of the different pieces that go together, talking about really what was going on with our waterfront here. We were also very important during World War I, building ships, and World War II, building submarine chasers and fireboats. As we continue to tell the story of the development of Rockport, we have the tourist industry which came in 1888 with the railroad. Many people think of us as a tourist town today. They don't recognize that our tourism really began in the late 1800s because people could take a train from San Antonio, come in for the day, and go back on a night train, or stay a day or two. So we had some beautiful hotels. We had fantastic resort hotels. We have a photograph of one of them here. This was the Del Mar Hotel. And it was, as you can see, 3 or 4 stories high. It had a dining room that seated 200. Probably the most famous person who came here was Governor Hogg. There was also a pavilion behind this hotel. Here you see the Bailey Pavilion. It was an entertainment center in the evenings, but during the day you could rent a space for a dime, 10 cents, and go into your area and change out of your elaborate clothing and into a swimming suit. So this was what they enjoyed. I should say a bathing suit, because they didn't really swim. They mainly sat in the water and cooled off. But this was a wonderful thing for the people coming from the interior. It was very, very popular. Also, at the same time, we had many people coming in to hunt and fish. The hunting for ducks and geese must have been phenomenal. We see that people belonged to the St. Charles Bay Hunting Club all the way from Kansas City, Missouri. In this case, we have artifacts from some of the hotels. So we have the Del Mar, we have some spoons from the Del Mar, a juice set from the Del Mar, and a vase that was a souvenir vase for the Bayside Inn. Our middle shelf here tells about our next era, which was the one of the art colony. We had the artists coming in the 40s beginning to teach, and we had Simon Michael and Estelle Starr, who were the people that really encouraged other artists to join them in what they were doing down here. The coast, of course, had great weather, good light, and wonderful scenery. So the next part of our story talks about the art colony that came in and the environmental concerns that came in and have continued to be very important of what Rockport supports. So we have some story about Connie Hager, who came here in the 30s, recorded over 500 species of birds, and was the real impetus for people paying attention to the flyways and to the migration of the hummingbirds. So we honor her, as did the Audubon Society when they brought their meeting here in the 1960s. If you haven't seen enough at this point, then we have a show of postcards, which are absolutely fascinating. You'll see some of the scenes that we've talked about, and you'll see other scenes that you'd like to identify or wonder at. These postcards are from the Jim Maloney collection, and we really appreciate his letting us use these for this purpose. We hope that you'll join us. This exhibit will be up for at least a year or two, and the reason that we put this up is for you to be able to send friends here and say, do you want to learn about Rockport Fulton? It's all here on the walls. It'll probably take you 45 minutes to an hour to truly look at the posters, look at the artifacts, and go away with a comprehensive story of Rockport Fulton. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. Hey. Well, here we are at the gift shop. You can purchase items here or you can purchase them online. We really make a specialty of bringing in very specific local books. So our most recent book is the ABCs of the Rockport Fulton Art Colony. And this was designed to be used by teachers and kids. And it's wonderful. It's a really good story based on one of the exhibits that we featured here at the History Center. Another book that we have available is Taking the Tide, all about the shrimping in the area. Another exhibit that turned into a book was Foodways. This was early on, about 3 years ago, and it's not just about foodways, it's about the restaurants, menus, and all of the history associated with We also have the story by our editor of our newspaper called 30 Years Through the News Lens, which takes you through the years 1984 to 2013. An early book that was published by the History Center before we'd even opened this little center is Aransas County and Postcards. It's still one of the most popular that we have. And the classic book that was written probably 20 years ago, maybe 25, is called Aransas, Life in the Texas Coastal Community.